Today, my topic is an Austrian view of monopoly and antitrust law, Austrian critique of mainstream analysis of monopoly, monopsony, perfect competition, logical contradictions of antitrust law. I have to start off with my antitrust monopoly joke. Actually, it's a two-part joke. The first part of the joke is there were 3 Soviet prisoners. And as Soviet prisoners do, what they do is they compare notes. Why are you in jail? Why are you in the gulag? And the first one says, well, I came to work late, and they accused me of cheating the state out of my labor services. And the second guy said, well, I came to work early, and they accused me of brown-nosing. And the third guy said, I came to work exactly on time every day, and they accused me of owning a Western wristwatch. I told this joke to an audience of economists and lawyers who specialize in antitrust cases, and this joke, the first half of this joke got big laughter. They all appreciated that. The second part, they were deadly silent. They didn't like this at all. And now, the second part of the joke is that there were 3 U.S. prisoners all in jail for antitrust violations and monopoly, criminal monopolists. And the first, and as prisoners do, they compare notes as to why you're in jail. And the first guy said, I charged higher prices than everyone else, and they accused me of profiteering and price gouging. Second guy said, well, I am in jail because I charged lower prices than everyone else, and they accused me of predatory price cutting and cutthroat competition. And the third guy said, I charged the same prices as everyone else, which is hard to see how he did given the first 2, but forget about that. It's just a joke. And they accused me of collusion and cartelization. You know, Ayn Rand used to say that if you make it such that no matter what you do, you're a criminal, that's not legitimate law. Legitimate law, I mean, the law of murder is legitimate law. If you murder someone, you're a murderer and you're a bad guy. And if you don't murder someone, you're not a bad guy. But no matter what you do, if you come to work early, late, or on time, if you charge higher, lower, or the same prices, and you can be indicted for a law violation, this is not a legitimate law. This is lunacy. And that's roughly what the antitrust law is. And it's predicated on the neoclassical analysis of perfect competition and monopoly, so that too is just as imbecilic and contradictory as anything else. Well, how does the government look at it? For them, it depends upon how concentrated the industry is. What is the Herfindahl index? What is the 4-firm concentration ratio? What is the 8-firm concentration ratio? Before the powers that be will allow a merger to occur, they conduct an investigation, which costs a lot of money, and the bureaucrats, and Tom DiLorenzo is just talking about how well paid they are. They're very well paid, and they do a study to see how concentrated it is. But the whole thing is dead from the neck up, because whether an industry is concentrated or not depends upon how you define the industry. If you define the industry as food, well, then the 8-firm concentration ratio is 0, because there's zillions of producers of food. But if you define it as crunchy cereal, or sweet crunchy cereal that goes snap, crackle, and pop, well, then there are very few firms in that industry. So what the powers that be want to do is define it very narrowly so that there's a high concentration ratio. But that's just silly. And similarly, if you define the market as the whole world, well, then you'll get a low concentration ratio. If you define the market as just the U.S. or just Alabama or just Magnolia Street, well, then you'll get higher and higher concentration ratios. So the whole thing is a crock. It's just a logical silliness. The way Austrians look at monopoly and competition is very different. The way Austrian economists see this is there free entry? If there's free entry, it doesn't matter how many firms are in the industry. Alcoa Aluminum was the only firm in the aluminum industry for a long, long while, and prices kept coming down, and there was more and more efficiency. The 1-firm concentration ratio was 100%, and we see nothing wrong with it, because if you set up an alternative aluminum company, did you go to jail? No. So it's a free industry. Similarly with IBM. IBM was the only producer of computers for many years, but you didn't go to jail if you competed with them, so it's competition. We don't see it in terms of Herfindahl indexes and concentration ratios, which are just silly. On the other hand, the taxi medallions in most big cities, if you drive around and try to pick up people in a taxi, they'll throw you in jail. Even though there are many, many cab companies. So it doesn't matter how many companies, it matters, can you freely compete? And if you can freely compete, that's part of the free enterprise system, part of economic freedom. And if you can't, it's part of monopoly. And it doesn't matter how many monopolists there are. Monopoly is a function of whether you can compete or not. Can I compete against the New York Times? Yes. So the industry is free. Perfect competition is one of the biggest shocks in the book. There are others, but they have this homogeneous goods, thousands of competitors, full information. We're always at equilibrium. There's zero profits. It's sort of like a weird concoction that they invented. And then what they do, if they want to get you, they say, well, you don't look like perfect competition. So they invent some sort of weird thing, and they say, you don't look like it, and then they can put you in jail. The reason poor Bill Gates got in trouble is he was sitting out there in Seattle and he wasn't giving money to the boys in Washington. He didn't give to the Democrats or to the Republicans. He didn't understand that you just can't have a big business. You're supposed to give to the boys in Washington. He didn't. He ignored them. So they came after him with this cockamamie scheme, which can indict pretty much anyone. I mean, LouRockwell.com is a monopolist of LouRockwell.com services. There's no other. So we should put him in jail. The Mises Institute, too. There's only one Mises Institute in the U.S. There are a few in Europe and South America. Walter Block Services. I'm the only one that can provide them. So I should be put in jail. I mean, you can put anyone in jail on this basis. Tiger Woods is the only one who golfs exactly like Tiger Woods. So he's a monopolist of Tiger Woods services. The whole thing is weird. There's a problem of one big firm. Suppose you get an amalgamation, a concentration. What happens is a merger between, say, IBM and Google and Microsoft and Burger King and McDonald's and Walmart, and they all decide to merge. And then they pull in Heinz, and then they pull in every other industry, and now we have what Murray Rothbard calls in Mankind State, one big firm. Do we need fear this? Well, no, because for Austrians it doesn't matter the size or the concentration. The only question is, can another firm compete with this new one big firm, which is an amalgamation of all the big firms that I just mentioned? And if you don't go to jail for competing with them, well, then it's part of the free enterprise system. But what Murray says is that this is extremely unlikely, because if you really had a gigantic firm that encompassed virtually all of the entire economy, it would have the same problems of socialist planning, central planning, as the central planners have in the Soviet Union. There wouldn't be any markets, because that would be the only firm, and they would be unable to have a rational economy, and thus they would lose out to small competitors. There is a, how shall I say it, a hierarchy of regulation theory. And the most unsophisticated view, and I didn't put any name there because every mainstream economist believes this crap. The purpose of regulation is because we have market failure and we have greedy capitalists, and what they're going to do is exploit workers and kill them with the Pinto or whatever it is, which is a little silly because you don't make money by killing your customers. But in any case, the purpose of regulation, this is sort of the Obama-Bush view of regulation. Businessmen are running amok, they're exploiting workers, so we get regulators to come in and make them lower their prices and increase their quality and make them behave. That's the very unsophisticated view of regulation. A more sophisticated view of regulation is associated with George Stigler of the University of Chicago, and it's called capture theory. What this is is originally we set out in the unsophisticated way. We have goody-goody guys who are the regulators and evil regulatees, namely the capitalists, and they tell them to shape up. But then what happens is that the regulatees capture the regulators. How does this work? Well, suppose you're a regulator, and you're making, 80,000 bucks. What you do is you seek a job in the firm that you had been regulating as a vice president, making a lot more money, because you now know the innards or the inner workings of the regulation bureau, and you can serve that company very well because your ex-buddies or your buddies or your ex-colleagues are now regulating you and you have an in with them. And then what you do is you get a job back in the regulatory bureau at a higher level, and then you go back. So you get this sort of, the revolving door. It's called the revolving door of labor economics. Namely, the two of them get together. It's sort of like, sometimes the prisoner and the guard get together, and they call it, Stockholm Syndrome or something like that? You get this phenomenon. So that's the capture theory. And it's got something to be said for it. But a much better way, and here Tom Woods talked about historians that he learned from who were not Austrians. Well, Gabriel Kolko, is a Marxist historian. And he did magnificent work in railroads and regulation and Triumph of Conservatism. Thanks, Roderick. And what he says is, it's not so much capture, although there is some capture, but what it is that this regulation comes at the behest at the very beginning from the so-called regulatee, from the so-called company that is going to be regulated. And what he shows is, say, in the Meat Inspection Acts or in the Food and Drug Administration, which are regulation institutions, is that the big companies, Swift and Armour and the other meat packing companies, were losing market share to upstart meat packers in the Midwest near Chicago. And they kept losing market share because these other guys were more efficient. So what they finally determined upon was this thing called meatpacking inspection, or Food and Drug Administration in the case of the pharmaceutical companies, where you now get a regulatory bureau, and they impose all sorts of paperwork, which the large companies are able to do more efficiently because of economies of scale. Plus, they put their own people in those regulatory agencies. And the idea is to regulate out the smaller competitors so that the large firms can keep their market share. So it's a very, very different kind of analysis of regulation. There's an interesting story behind Kolko. When libertarians in the 60s and 70s got hold of this book, they said, whoop-de-doo, this is hot stuff. Let's invite him to our seminars. And he came, but then he realized, you see, he's a Marxist, so he's against all sorts of corporations, period. Whereas libertarians are only against bad corporations, not against legitimate corporations who abide by marketplace situations. So he refused to come anymore because he was giving aid to the enemy. Well, we still have his book, even though we don't have him. But it's very strange to push away people who regard you as insightful and even heroic. But, he's a Marxist, so what can you expect? But he still did good work. Okay. One of the big deals about monopoly theory is restraint of trade. And I'll show you some of the geometry of this a little later. They're big on restraint of trade. You could be selling more at a lower price, but you're purposely withholding part of the sales so as to jack up the price, and that's sort of the big indictment. Well, here's a reductio ad absurdum. I go over to this married woman and I say, hey, chickie, come to bed with me. Notice my style here. It really works great. And you know what this bitch says? She says, I'm monogamously married and I'm faithful to my husband. And you know what I do? I call upon the antitrust people to get her. Because she's engaging in withholding of certain services. Do you see the point? She's engaged in restraint of trade. She's refusing to trade with me. I'm willing to trade with her, but she says no. So she's in the exact same position as the people who are indicted on monopoly grounds. The two are indistinguishable. And the point is that if it's legitimate to apply this to business, it's legitimate to apply it to personal life, as in dating or sex or whatever. I'm a big fan of reductio ad absurdum. You take the logic of what they're doing and you keep applying it, and then you come up with weird results. Another favorite one of mine is this thing about anti-discrimination. You know, you can't discriminate against this group or that group in business. But if you try it in personal life, what you come up with is compulsory bisexuality. Because look, heteros, disgusting heteros, they refuse to go to bed with half the human race. The male heteros refuse to go to bed with males, and the female heteros refuse to go to bed with females. They're both disgusting. But the homos are equally disgusting because they each refuse to go to bed with half the human race also. The male homosexuals refuse to go to bed with a woman, and the female heterosexuals, lesbians, refuse to go to bed with men. It's only bisexuals who are the good guys. So if you really believe in this crap, what you have to do is impose bisexuality on everyone. Now people say, well, this only applies to business. But why? If it's a matter of rights not to be discriminated against, it should apply in personal life as well as in business. So that's where I got this, my attack on the married woman who's faithful to her husband. I mean, we should put her in jail on antitrust. Okay, now look. If I trade you my shirt for your wristwatch, we know that I like your wristwatch better than my shirt because I'm willing to make the trade, and we know that you like this crummy shirt more than my wristwatch, than your wristwatch. We can deduce from the fact that there was voluntary trade that there was mutual benefit. Right? Now, we don't know exactly why. Maybe you want this shirt for weird purposes, or you think that I'll be your friend if we make the trade, and I won't. I'll hate you. I hate people I trade. It doesn't, in other words, what I'm saying is we don't know why it is that you prefer the shirt to your wristwatch. All we know is if you're willing to trade, you do prefer it, and therefore we are entitled to infer or deduce that you gained in welfare. Not by a number of utils, but you gained in welfare, period. But I notice that Joshua over here has a pen, and I have a wristwatch, and we haven't traded. You get that? He's got his pen, I've got my wristwatch, we haven't traded. What can I infer from that? Nothing! I can't infer anything. I can't deduce anything from that. I can't deduce that it would have been better if we had traded. How do I know that? The only way I can know that it would have been better is if we actually consummate the trade. This is one of the core fallacies of the mainstream neoclassical analysis of trade and monopoly. They are inferring from lack of trade that there should have been a trade, and the bad guys who aren't engaging in trade are withholding or restraining trade. Can you imagine the audacity? I mean, that's what they do. Okay, I'm going to now, that was sort of the first half, the philosophical analysis. I didn't do any of the diagrams. What the mainstream people, they're a bunch of perverts. They love these diagrams. And I'm going to go into some diagrams to help me explain what's going on. Okay, the first diagram is the predatory price-cutting model diagram. I get this from John McGee, who wrote this magnificent article, another non-Austrian. See how open-minded we are? He's a Chicagoan. He wrote in the Journal of Law and Economics, I think in 60 or 61. And this was his analysis of the Rockefeller predatory price-cutting model. So there's a picture of the U.S. I don't know if you can recognize that as the U.S. There's Texas, there's Florida. This is freehand, and I'm not known for my autistic endeavors, so bear with me. And what you have is a bunch of S's for Standard Oil and a bunch of X's for independents, and they're all over the place. And we start in Texas. And what happens is that the Standard Oil goes to Texas and charges a very, very low price, way below the cost of refining the oil. and everybody buys from Standard Oil. How does Standard Oil finance it? From all the other S's, the other Standard Oils all over the place. They all chip in for this price war. And then the X in Texas goes broke. And then we go to Washington State and we do the same thing. And we cross out the X over here because now everyone in the U.S., especially from Texas, which has got a lot of money because they just knocked out their ex-opponent in Texas, they all gang up on the X or the independent in Washington State and they knock him out, and then they go all around the whole country knocking out all the independents, and Rockefeller wins the race. At the end of the day, we had this evil monopolist Rockefeller. This is the unsophisticated analysis of what's going on. The sophisticated analysis provided by John McGee is very different. He says, look, the X in Texas, let's get back to him. Ordinary, what is gas now? $2.50 a gallon? Suppose that Standard Oil is selling it for $1 a gallon. Well, the X has a ploy. He can say, he can put up a sign on his garage, say, hey, everyone, let's go buy from Standard Oil. I'm going to buy from Standard Oil myself. I'm going to stock up an empty tank with $1 a gallon gas, and then when this idiot runs out of money, then, we'll go back to normal. So that's a very powerful weapon that he's got. And this model assumes that everyone else is an idiot. That the people in Washington State didn't learn from what happened in Texas, if in Texas it succeeded, which is ridiculous because you've got a lot of big buyers of gasoline who will remember this and will act so as to support the independent, because the independent will say, hey, look at what Rockefeller did in Texas, he's going to do the same thing here. So this whole thing is sort of silly. Okay, the next thing I want to do is sort of attack perfect competition. The perfect competition, they have this fetish about price equals marginal cost. And if you have a price which is a flat line and the marginal cost is rising, what they say is if you're at A and you're thinking of going to B, you'll gain this much, it'll only cost you that much. So you gain the area between those two. Or where I've marked in red, you go from B to C and you gain that difference. So you'll end up at this point right here where price equals marginal cost. That's one of their basic elements. Well, so what we have is here is supply and demand. This is the market, and this is the individual company, which has an average cost curve and a marginal cost curve, and the marginal cost curve intersects the average cost curve at the lowest point of the average cost curve. And if the price is here, what you'll have is profits. And if you have profits, more people will come in. On the other hand, if you have this sort of configuration where the price is below average cost, so the total benefits or total receipts are below total cost, the firm will go broke, and if this is the price, people will leave the industry and the supply curve will shift up to the left. And then what you get is the grand dénouement, if I'm pronouncing that right. Here we go. At C. You know the G spot in women, it's sort of, that's where you have an orgasm. Well, the C spot is for these perverts. I mean, when they see that, when they see the bottom of the average cost curve where the marginal, they go, they're real perverts. I mean, they're disgusting. And what they hate more than anything else is a downward sloping demand curve. Now, they don't mind a downward sloping demand curve for the industry. I mean, you've got to have downward sloping and upward sloping supply curves. But what they hate more than anything else with a purple passion is a downward sloping demand curve facing an individual producer. Why is this? Because then you have a marginal revenue curve that deviates from the average revenue or the demand curve. See, let's say you move from A to B. You go from price of A to price of B. You'd think that you lose only the difference between price of A and price of B, but no. You lose not only the difference between price of A and price of B, but you also lose price of A minus price of B times the inframarginal units, namely OA, from here to here. And when you take that into account, your receipts are down at B prime. Now you might think, well, this is sort of weird. Why get excited about that? It's just 2 lines. But, and the similar thing applies in monopsony. When you go from point A to B on the supply curve, you think that your extra cost would just be the difference between PB and PA, but no. It's PBA minus PB minus PA times OA, or the difference between PA and A, and thus you go up to B prime, so you get a marginal cost that deviates from the average cost or the supply curve. Okay, now what's this got to do with anything? What this has got to do with anything is the following. And here we go. This is sort of, well, this is the curve. How many are you familiar with this curve? With this diagram? Raise your hands if you've seen that. Oh wow, that's 2/3 of the group. So you people are pretty sophisticated. But for the other people, I'm going to start in with the simpler one. I'm going to start in with the, what do they call it, the well in the desert kind of thing, where the marginal costs are flat. You see, here's that point C. Remember point C? That's like the G-spot. They want to be at point C. They yearn to be at point C. C is great. But because the marginal revenue deviates from the demand curve, what happens is that the marginal cost hits the marginal revenue at QM, and they shoot up to point M, where you get a much higher price than at point C. In other words, at point C, if the costs of getting well water are 0, then the price should be 0 in their perverted view. But it's up here at point M, or at PM. Now, why is this bad? This is bad for 4 reasons. The first reason is that PM is higher than QM. QM is 0. The second one is that QC, quantity of the competitive industry, is bigger than quantity of monopolists. Now, don't ask me why a higher price is worse than a lower price. To me, you'd have to have more reason. You just can't say the higher the price, the worse. You just can't say the more quantity, the better. Maybe this is too much quantity. The third one is that evil profits. There are profits made here by, the profits are 0 PM MQM, this box here, whereas at point C there are 0 profits, and perfect competitors hate profits, which is another indication of where they're coming from. But the worst thing is this thing called DWL, dead weight loss. And this is a misallocation of resources, so-called, supposedly, because people really want this unit here. They place this value on it, and yet the monopolistic withholder is refusing to provide it. And this really rankles them. But look, suppose this is Tiger Woods. Suppose this is Tiger Woods, and this is, I don't know, 50 golf tournaments a year, and this is 20 golf tournaments a year. And Tiger Woods only plays 20 golf tournaments a year. What these despicable people are in effect saying is that we, the consumers, value this many golf tournaments at this level, and it only costs Tiger Woods that, namely 0, and the bastard isn't playing more golf. Remember, getting back to me and Joshua, from the fact that we haven't traded anything, they're inferring that we should trade. Well, how do they know any of this stuff? This is just lines on a blackboard or lines on a wall here. They don't know any of this stuff. They just make it up. It's just a fairy tale. And yet the textbooks are full of this crap. And this is sort of the microeconomics, the way they teach it. It's just horrible stuff. You can't infer or deduce from the fact that people aren't trading that they should trade. How does anyone know? How does anyone know the true costs? The true costs for the Austrians are opportunity or alternative costs, which is subjective. Now you put this diagram over here. Here's the dead weight loss. Here's the profit, PC, PM, M, whatever that point is. This little box here is profit. Here's the dead weight loss. You get a higher price, bad quantity, profit, and dead weight loss. Here is the point C that they love, and in here, Tiger Woods, they want Tiger Woods to play 12 golf tournaments a year, and he's only playing 9, and they're saying he's monopolistically withholding 3 golf tournaments. Just like this woman is monopolistically withholding her sexual services for me And I can prove it because of this diagram. Maybe next time I'm in a bar, I'll whip this out, and I'll say, "Look, lady, get with it. This proves that you should come to bed with me." I mean, what do you think of my chances? Okay, enough of that. Let's get to the next thing. Now, remember, the neoclassicals, they just love flat demand curves. And here is an average cost curve, and you'll see that the intersection point, or the tangency point between the average cost curve and the demand for the individual, is at the bottom of the average cost curve. So again, this is point C, and everything is hunky-dory, and they just love it. Whereas, if you have a downward sloping demand curve, instead of being at C, we're at the point M, the monopolistic point. And now we have economic inefficiency. And these neoclassicals, they hate economic inefficiency. Well, the whole point is ludicrous because of no one knows the demand curve and this point about interpersonal comparisons of utility. See, to go back a little bit, what they're really doing is making an ICU fallacy. They're making a fallacy of interpersonal comparisons of utility. They're saying some people value it at this much, other people value it only at that much, and yet they're not trading. You can't. Interpersonal comparisons of utility are invalid. Period. Nothing follows from them. The whole thing is as dead as a doornail. So what Murray Rothbard does is he is also into reductios ad absurdum, and he draws this curve, which is the most magnificent curve. When I saw this, I practically wet my pants. I mean, I'm a little perverted about this too. What he did is he drew a average cost curve, not a smooth one, but a little jagged one, and now you don't have a tangency, because in order to have a tangency, you need a smooth curve. You have a jagged curve, but you have a touching point at the lousy C. See, this is the point C, and even though you have a downward sloping demand curve, Murray Rothbard shows in many comments that you can still get to where the neoclassicals want to get, so downward sloping demand curves aren't the bogeyman that they say they are. Let me pull a trick on you people. Here's the situation. We have supply and demand of labor, and at $5 an hour, there are 1,000 workers employed, and the total wage bill is $5,000. Everyone with me on this? Yes? That's not part of the trick yet. We'll get to the trick. This part we accept. Then what happens is the minimum wage law goes up to $7, and we have unemployment. 100 people are unemployed, and then there are these other people who now want jobs, and put it this way, this is unemployment from here to here. From here to here is unemployment, but only 100 people lose jobs. These other people out here, let's say these other 200 people, they now want jobs at the higher price, but they didn't lose a job because they didn't have a job in the first place. Yes? Basic elementary supply and demand stuff. Okay, but with 900 workers at $7 an hour, the wage bill instead of $5,000 goes up to $6,300, correct? Now, these 900 people are making out like bandits. Instead of making $5 an hour, they're making $7 an hour. On the other hand, 100 people of their fraternal union members or whatever they are, fellow laborers, have no jobs at all, and that's no good. But what they could do, given fraternalism on the part of the workers, they could say, okay, look, we'll take turns being the 100. Every 9th or every 10th week, you don't work. Every 10th week, you don't work. And what we'll do is we'll share the money. And how does that work out? The way it works out is you now divide 6,300 by 1,000 instead of 900. See, if you divide 6,300 by 900, you get $7. But if you divide 6,300 by 1,000, you get $6.30. So in effect, the workers are sharing this boon. They're not going from 5 to 7 because they're sharing it. So they're just going from 5 to 6.30, which is an improvement. And that way, nobody is unemployed, or everyone gets the 10th week off. Everyone with me so far? Now for the trick. It sounds like the minimum wage is a pretty good deal. The workers are doing better. What's wrong with this? Can't hear you. Well, forget about 200. They never had jobs, and screw them. Yes, young lady. It's true the product will be less because we only have 900 workers working instead of 1,000 workers, so the GDP will go. So that's a good point. Green shirt?
Expansion is slowed down because now it costs more to expand factories, so investment is decreased.
Okay, that's true too. There is, which is similar to what this young lady was saying, that there will be less GDP because there are fewer workers and less incentive to open factories. Red shirt?
The wages in terms of hours, so they're working less total hours.
Yeah, but you're saying the same thing as this young lady said. No, you're just saying it in a different way. Yes, the GDP will go down because there are fewer workers or fewer hours or fewer somethings. Paul?
I say there's an oversupply, and there's going to be
No oversupply. We're at equilibrium there. Joshua? Give me that pen, by the way. What do you mean it's mine? What is this private property rights crap? $1 million? Get out.
Because of the higher cost of employment, goods will cost more, and so the workers will have to pay for more expensive goods.
The answer I'm looking for is elasticity. You know, the way I teach elasticity to my students is I do it with drugs and heroin and stuff because it sort of spiffs it up a little. Elasticity is a dull subject, but here it's very important. Notice what is the elasticity of that demand curve between this point and that point? Is it unitary, inelastic, or elastic? Inelastic, namely total revenue is going up as we move up. It's very inelastic. And what is an inelastic demand curve? An inelastic demand curve is a short-run demand curve. Namely, this is just the initial... look, when the minimum wage law went up from 40 cents to 70 cents an hour, this in 1936, 1937, I forget the year, this was the highest percentage increase of the minimum wage ever. It was almost doubling. At the 40 cents, when I was a kid, you go into a high-rise building and you get into the elevator and there's a guy there. He's not a pervert, he's the elevator operator. And he says, what floor do you want? And he goes with the machine and he gets you to the floor and then he has to adjust it because he doesn't want you to trip as you get out, and finally you get out. The next day, after the minimum wage law went from 40 to 70, how many elevator operators in the U.S. were fired the next day? Zero. None. It's too quick. Let me try a baseball analogy. There's this guy who throws the ball at 105 miles an hour. Strasburg. They ought to have a speed limit. That's unconscionable. The poor batters. But when they do batting practice to give the batters confidence, how fast does the pitcher throw the ball? 40, 50 miles an hour? Right? Well, why do they do that? Why do they throw it slower when they want the batter to succeed and faster when they don't want the batter to succeed? And the reason is that the faster the thing is, the less time there is to adjust. If I'm the batter here and the ball is coming at 105 miles an hour, it sort of goes like that, I don't have any time to adjust. If it's coming at 50 miles an hour, I can sort of go like this and go like that and try to keep my eye on the ball, and I have a much better shot at it. Okay? So the point is, the more time you have, the more you can adjust. So, how many elevator operators got fired the very next day, even though elevator operators were minimum wage type people? None, because there wasn't time to adjust. But there was a thing called automatic elevators. They had the technology. It's just that the lower technology elevators plus a 40-cent person outcompeted a more expensive, more sophisticated machine at workers at 70 cents. But now that it was 70 cents, I said that wrong. The automatic elevators were not able to compete against 70 cents, against 40 cents, but now that it was 70 cents, it paid to fire those 70-cent workers, the suddenly more expensive factor of production, and hire substitutes, namely more sophisticated technological equipment and more sophisticated workers who were making these automatic elevators. So over the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years, all the manual elevators disappeared. Because this is a demand curve in the very short run. This is a longer medium run, longer run, longer run. The longer the run, the more elastic. The more time you have to adjust to a price change, the more adjustment to the price change you can make. And if they're going to practically double the unskilled workers, you can't fire them right away, but eventually you fire them all. It's very similar when I was a kid. You'd pull into a filling station and you're attacked by about 5 people. Somebody puts the gas in, somebody checks the tire pressure, somebody checks that there's water in the what do you call it, the radiator, somebody washes the windows. You get 4 or 5 people all there, and this is sort of the bottom rung of the employment level. People learn skills to show up on time, to treat the customers nicely. Now what's in effect happening with the minimum wage law is here is the employment ladder. The bottom of the employment ladder is cut off by the minimum wage. These people just can't get jobs. And it's mostly young black teenagers, males, who get into crime. And this is one of the problems with the minimum wage. Why am I raising minimum wage? The reason I'm raising minimum wage is because of a thing called monopsony. You remember the monopsony diagram I gave, where the deviation of the supply curve and the marginal cost curve? I did that before. My colleague at Loyola University, Bill Barnett, and I have this article called Monopsony Theory in the American Review of Political Economy. If any of you are interested in it, please come get me. Email me and I'll send you a copy of it. The reason I'm mentioning the minimum wage is because of these evil people, Card and Kruger. You may have heard of them. They're from Princeton or some other socialist university. And what they say is that in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, the minimum wage law rose, and yet you didn't get the unemployment of unskilled workers that you'd expect. And one of the reasons, or one of the possible explanations for this, is monopsony. So Bill Barnett and I are trying to do for monopsony what many other Austrian economists did for monopoly. I've also attacked the monopoly thing, but monopsony is sort of what is that thing? Uncharted territory or something in economics, or less charted than monopoly. You type in monopsony and the computer says you're misspelling monopoly. Like they don't know from monopsony. It's an interesting thing to look at Finus Welch and Gary Becker and other Jacob Mintz and other labor economists of the mainstream version. You'd think if they stuck to their logical positivism, what they would have said to the Card and Kruger analysis was, oh, well, maybe economic law works differently in New Jersey. I mean, they pronounce it New Jersey, so maybe economic law works differently there. Or maybe there are exceptions to the minimum wage law. Whereas the Austrians say that, this is praxeology, this is apodictic stuff. When you raise the price of labor, fewer unskilled workers than otherwise would have been hired are hired, period. That's it, no exceptions. So you'd think that Becker would have, and these other labor economists would have said, oh, well, no big deal. Out of every 100 studies, 2 or 3 show this. But no, they went in there with fire in their eye. They try to replicate the study. They try to call the people, and they couldn't replicate the data. And they did new studies, and they showed that the minimum wage law works the way it usually works. Well, I'm out of time. I hope you benefited from the analysis of monopoly and antitrust. Thank you.